In this video, in just a few minutes, I'm going to show you how to almost totally lose the fear of death. And this is something I used to be somewhat of an expert on, continuously obsessed with dying. And the last few videos I've done have been about paradoxes, about the ego wanting to become enlightened, but at the same time, enlightenment is really the loss of the ego, and how the ego wants to know reality. But the thinking mind that gives rise to the ego only constructs images or representations of reality, so it can never know the real thing, because in a way it's a map of the territory. It's not the actual territory. And there's another real similar paradox when it comes to our fears of death, because there's only a part of you that fears death, and that's the thinking mind. And there's a good reason for this, because it's the thinking mind that is going to die. And so in a realistic way, it has every right to fear death. But in Advaita Vedanta, there's a really interesting claim that I think some people have a hard time buying, and that is that awareness, consciousness persists even during sleep. And that's probably a little bit difficult for people to really grasp, but we could take a lighter version of this. Are you conscious when you're not thinking? And that's a very interesting thing to become aware of, because there's so many times in life, whether it's being totally lost in music, and Csikszentmihalyi calls this flow, where you're so absorbed in some task that thinking mind is really, for all intents and purposes, it's just shut off. And we have these experiences, all of us, we have these. But the problem is the thinking mind turns back on, and it uses phrases like, well, we were zoned out. But we really were not zoned out. We were zoned in. We were conscious awareness without the thinking mind. So consider, what if that's what death is? In other words, what if death is a little like that? It's the thinking mind that dies, and it leaves pure awareness, without judgment, without categories, without personal identities, without egos, without, all the baggage that comes along with thinking. So this is a paradox, because it's exactly what we talked about when we talked about enlightenment. In other words, the same state that's our biggest fear. Well, it's not our biggest fear, it's the thinking mind's biggest fear, and that is the death of the thinking mind, is the very thing we strive for when we do meditation, or we do any mindfulness practice. We're really trying to be awake in the world without thinking. But again, the paradox is what if that is actually the state that we might consider death? It's really the death of the thinking mind, and awareness is always there. Awareness is always present, and it may indeed be present when we're sleeping, and it may be present, eternal, and even persist after the death of the thinking mind. And if you can hold that paradox, you'll see that the fear of death almost completely just evaporates.